to join us, but he is a part of the team. He just had another obligation today. So, and we did introductions when we did ground rules, but I'm wondering if there's a feeling we need to do them again since it's been a little while.
I think so. That would be good.
Okay.
Are we on the record?
We're, yes, that's what these are.
Just make sure.
Yeah.
For the owls.
And Zach is making sure we're on, being recorded and on live. I know, Mary, that Carly sent you the link, so you have that for your folks.
Yes, and set it up. Thanks, Carly.
So I'll start with introductions and then we can kind of move into how our day will go. So I'm Jennifer Duvall, Human Resources.
Hi, Olivia Meyer-Cook, Director of Finance and Operations.
Nicole Hendricks, Assistant Principal at CD.
Diane Buckles, Principal at Mountain View, and Corrales Online.
Tim Stratemeyer, Maintenance Technician. Isaac Thomas, Life Skills at CHS.
James Marion, Hipster at CD.
Valley Coach Freedom, CV Career Specialist.
Mary Marshall, I'm OSCA Chapter 2 President and the Registrar Office Manager still for Corvallis Over.
Obie Williams, OCA Field Rep.
Marcy Hermans, Bessie Coleman Elementary Office Manager.
Allison Barrett, data pronouns, Spock at Franklin and Adams.
Vince Adams, Corvallis School Board.
Kim Patton, Director of Facilities and Transportation.
Carly Atkins, HR Specialist.
Julie Catala, part-time, help out. Retired, but also.
So Carly is actually leaving. I think a few of you knew that, but not everyone. And so Julie's gonna be taking notes, but we're in transition today.
Nice working with you all.
I'm still having.
Can I veto that?
Toledo, leaving it.
I've already tried.
We're still good.
So I know today our focus is to share interests. Olivia is going to just share an update on what we do know and have about budget as we're preparing that for our school board and budget committee. And then Mary, I don't know if we'll be able to get as far as we had talked about possibly you all starting to share some language drafts. Okay.
What do we have to do on the ground rules? Do we need to go over those with everyone here? Or?
Well, we already did once.
Okay,
Do you feel we need to do that again?
I think everyone knows, and if anyone has a question, I think we're good. But we still have to sign it.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it's just, let's try and be kind to this process. I mean, fine. So, do you want to just go back and forth with interest, or did you want to share your list and we share ours with you?
I have it in a little bundle, so we can pass them out. And
I have nothing to pass out. I'm just
Okay.
really going to share.
why don't I do, I'll pass the interest thing, and then we'll pass those, and then we can see what order we want to go down. I only made a few copies of the interest.
Okay.
I can have Radhika share them, we can just read them. I don't think it's something people really know.
Okay.
Do you want to copy that down this end?
Thank you.
I think Julie's gonna run a next card.
Oh, that'd be perfect. Try to get it.
So, are you cold?
Yes, there was roasting in here, so we.
Well, thank you for that, 'cause I would love that. So are you guys comfortable now, or do you want me to turn the AC up?
This the AC.
AC up.
It's AC on.
Because you're right under the bed.
No wonder.
I'm not ready for this.
Everybody else.
You don't want to move again by now?
It was set to 68. I upped it to 70 and it turned out. Oh, maybe it's starting to.
Do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, well, she's printing that off. We can
Oh,
start
okay,
with the, interest. So on interesting, we'll be opening articles 1 through 24, because there's some changes, even if it's just with pronouns or other words on every article. Appendix B and Appendix D, which is the salary, and then the coaches thing, which I assumed somehow we're gonna have to change after all the work's done. And then the MOUs, we had talked about a few. And today we're bringing forward Articles 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 12, 17, 20, 21, and 22. The basic interests are living wage with COLAs that reflects the ongoing cost of our classified being able to live in Corvallis and surrounding areas. Many have multiple jobs and are pay levels so low that they've been eligible to receive public benefits. Affordable health care for all regardless of FTE. A competitive benefits package to attract and keep employees. Access and inclusion to quality training for education in the 21st century. This includes safety, medical, and educational offerings. Safety in the workplace. And full review of contract with an eye towards fair and equitable treatment across the board for all CSD employees. So that's our interest, and do you want to just go straight into the articles? Or
Do you want to hear our interest first?
Oh, you have some, yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't print them out. So I just figured I'd verbally share
Yeah, I
that.
can just put on the bottom of mine, that's perfect.
So our interest is for a multi-year contract, 3 to 4 years would be great. Sustainable budget and our expenditures are in alignment with our resources. Compliance with minimum wage, maintaining a full school year. And let me know if you want me to pause.
I'm good.
Possibility of updating our salary schedule from a standpoint of, for example, renumbering, or I know we've talked over the past couple of years, just looking at it a little bit different.
Mhm.
So we have some interest in that. Maintain our integrity of the local option levy. A desire to increase instructional time for our students, which we recognize impacts work days. We have an interest in providing professional development time prior to the school year. And so probably a great example of that is time for some trainings and time to prep with our teachers. Line contract with practice. So example would be with our MOAs. Provide quality employee benefit package that is affordable over time. A plan to review our job classifications and families over time. Provide a safe working environment. Improve absenteeism and encourage wellness. And increase retention. Those are our interests.
Can you send me those as well?
Mhm.
I sort of write shorthand and use a lot.
Yeah.
So. Did you want to start right into the articles, or did you want to do Olivia's
I think
presentation
let's do
first?
the budget, just so you have that. I
think
think
that's
having the overview would be helpful.
Okay.
Relocate temporarily. Let's see. What light is. It's okay for everyone? Okay.
So the district team asked me just to share kind of a high level overview of our budget, and I wanted to start just with some general statistics about our student enrollment, our staffing levels, and our district spending. So kind of this is all just visuals. And if you have questions along the way, just find me and we can pause. So the first slide is just a summary of our district's enrollment over the last 5 years. This is important, and this is something we monitor because the primary source of revenue of our general fund is the state school fund allocation. And the state school fund allocation is predicated based on a payment per student. And so we watch this closely because when we our enrollment increases, we get more funding. When our enrollment decreases, we get less funding. So you can see over the last 5 years, our district enrollment has gone down 6.8%. Over the last 3 years, it's been 5%. You can see between 1920 and 2021, sort of the impact of the pandemic that had on our enrollment, very similar to what other districts across the state and the country experience. So this is kind of a snapshot of our student count. Something that we particularly have been paying close attention to is our enrollment numbers by grade. This is important to us because this tells a story about what we should expect in the coming years regarding our student enrollment. And when we know that all of our grades 8 through 12 are pretty large classes with more than 500 students, and every grade below 8th grade, with the exception of 5th grade, those classes are much smaller, some of them even less than 400 students. This tells us the story that over the next several years, our enrollment will continue to decline. And that's important for us to be mindful of and to pay attention to. I think this also demonstrates a good visualization. I think there's often a perception in the community that new housing units generate more students, and that's not the case for us. And this really demonstrates that, because when we see all of our elementary classes, with the exception of one of less than 500 students, we know that the new housing units aren't necessarily correlated to school-age children.
Olivia, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
The previous slide, you indicated that while 6% is over 5 years, 5%, most of that happened during COVID. Are we confident that the projections of the decreased classes will maintain as people start maybe going back into public school who maybe have went elsewhere? Do we feel like these numbers are a reflection of COVID or a true reflection of lessening numbers?
These are the current year numbers. We know that there are still some impacts, but we don't anticipate, we aren't banking on any sort of recovery beyond what we've already experienced at this point in time. Okay. And we know that with, we made the decision not to continue the Corvallis online option into next school year. That in fact may further negatively impact our enrollment. We may have some families that choose to enroll in a different option that offers an online option, if that's not something we're going to be offering again next year. Where we're seeing the biggest impact is at K-5. And we've talked a lot with our elementary principals over the last couple of months, because this is definitely an area where we're having to make some staffing reductions in the number of classroom teachers for K-5 students. So over the last 5 years, we've lost 400 K-5 students, so 13.4%. And in the last 3 years, that number has been about 271. Our last 2 kindergarten classes were less than 400 students. And so that's the first time in probably a really, really long time that that's been the case. So when we look at that first slide where we just were looking at total enrollment and the changes over the 5 years, grades K through 5 represent 87% of those enrollment decreases just in that one group. Okay, so I'm going to shift into a little wonky. So because it only shows 3 years, not 5 years, I don't know what happened with that. I have details on the next slide. So just kind of covering the 5-year summary. So over 5 years, we've increased our FTE by almost 20%. This just shows totals. I'm just going to go to the next slide because this actually has 5 years worth of data on it. And so this is the FTE by classification over the last 5 years. And we've seen growth in all employee groups. Our licensed group, we've added almost 43 FTE, which is 11.5% increase. Our classified group, we've added almost 93 FTE, or an increase of almost 28%. In our non-rep group, which includes all of our administrators and our non-represented employees, we've added just over 8 FTE, and that increase is about 18%. So you can see we've had a lot of growth in the staffing in all areas, more so in the classified area just by numbers and by percentages. And a lot of that is just due to a lot of the additional support services we've been adding in our schools over the last couple of years, especially with the student investment account additions. We funded a lot of classified staffing with that. And so when you kind of take those two things and you put them together, we look at our student staff ratio. And obviously with our student enrollment declining and our staffing levels increasing, we would expect to see that go down. And so you can see 5 years ago, we had about 9 students per employee in the district. And right now we have about 7 students per employee in the district. Shifting gears to dollars now. We talked about the FTE changes. This is the dollar change when we think about salaries and what we spent on salaries over the last 5 years. Not surprisingly, we've added FTEs, so we would expect to see our dollars increase, and we have. So over the last 5 years, all of our salaries as a whole have increased by almost 32%. When we look at it by group, more detailed, you can see, again, we've had growth in all employee group areas. For the licensed group, our licensed salaries have increased by almost 6 million, 26%. Classified salaries have increased by 4.3 million or 42%, and non-rep salaries have increased by 1.3 million, just under 30%. So this is kind of a telling number because this is what gives me a little bit of pause, knowing that our biggest revenue source really is driven by enrollment. We have almost doubled the amount that we spend on salaries per student in the last 5 years. We know that that's going to have to start to look a little different because that's just not sustainable for us. And I talked about that a little bit earlier, just with like classroom teachers knowing that we're serving less kids. We are starting to make some tightening in our schools and our systems, especially around staffing that is directly correlated to like working with a certain number of kids. So we've had to make some adjustments for next year's budget for that. And we're also still using a lot of one-time money to kind of ease the pain of making those shifts. We're using some of our federal relief dollars just to keep our class sizes, lower than what they would normally be if we would have just gone back to our standard formula. So we're looking to kind of not necessarily significantly decrease the spending per student, but just start to kind of level that off a little bit. And this is how much we spend on just staff salaries per FTE. So this is a good measure because I know that salaries vary by employee groups, but when we think about cost per FTE and how that's changed over the last 5 years, this is a pretty good measure. These numbers are all employee groups all combined, and you can see it's about a 12% increase over the last 5 years. But when we look at it by employee group, again, we see growth in all areas. Our licensed salary cost per FTE has gone up by almost 15% over the last 5 years. The classified cost per FTE has gone up by 17.4%, and the non-rep cost per FTE has gone up by 9.9%. So this is a good kind of indicator when we look at, we know that costs go up because we've been adding staffing, but really what is the cost per staffing? And so this is kind of a good measure of that. So I'm going to pause real quick. If there's any questions.
We looked at if the state hadn't put in minimum wage, what would have happened with our, I mean, I know that's some of why classified has gone up, it's because it has every year, made for classified, minimum wage had to go up. So I didn't know if that.
Well, it's very hypothetical. I don't know what the change in classified cost would have looked like had the change in minimum wage looked different. I mean, it's been an underlying factor in our proposals over the last couple of years, and will continue to be over the next couple of years as well. But it's pretty hard to say like what it would look like if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I think her point was that with minimum wage going up $6 in 5 years, it's kind of, a lot of our folks near minimum wage that really counts for a lot of that cost. I think that's what she was pointing to.
Yeah. The gap has also shrunk as well.
It has.
So the difference between like a teacher salary and a classified salary, that because the classified growth has gone up a little bit at a little bit higher pace, that gap is a little smaller than it was.
Correct.
Can I see the last slide on?
Sure, this one,
Yes.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So just kind of looking at the big picture with our general fund. This kind of gives a story over the last few years. The COVID pandemic definitely had an impact on our general fund in different ways, depending on the year. So we knew initially 5 years ago, we had anticipated starting to spend more, so spending more general fund dollars than what we were bringing in. And so the 1920 year is a good example of that. We spent $84.3 million that year, and we only received 80.6. We knew that we were going to take a big chunk out of our reserves in that year, and that was the first year, obviously, that COVID-19 started impacting the district. So we had a lot of costs that we carried that year, sort of kind of in between when the federal relief dollars started taking effect. So what you'll see in 2021 is kind of the opposite effect, where in that year, we had a lot of unfilled vacancies. We put a lot of pause on a lot of hiring during that time, just because there were so many unknowns and our students weren't in our schools at the beginning of that school year. And so we spent less money last year than what we received. And then you can kind of see this year, we're sort of, this is always what somebody like me likes to see, when you're kind of even, right? You're bringing in about the same as what you're going to spend, which makes for a nice, stable, even budget cycle and a stable ending fund balance as well. When we just look at this specific school year, this just tells a story of really where we started with our adopted budget and our revenues and what our current projection is, where we started with our adopted budget for our spending and what our current projection is. And so again, we are expecting to receive more revenue this year than what we had originally anticipated. The biggest factor behind that is because I know I talked about that funding per student and how that's like the biggest factor with our general fund budget. But enrollment across the state decreased. And so when enrollment across the state decreased, the funding per student actually increased because there were like less students in the pool. And so that really lessened the impact of our enrollment decrease. And so we ended up getting more state school fund revenue than what we had originally anticipated at the beginning of the year when we had our adopted budget. Primarily just because we didn't know what was happening necessarily in all these other districts across the state. Everyone had their projected enrollment out there. And now that things have started to come to fruition, we have a better idea of what that actually looks like. So that's really good news. And then in spending, we're anticipating spending a little bit less than what we had budgeted. And that's pretty normal. We never spend 100% of our budget. Pre-COVID, we generally spent like 98% of our budget. Now that's a little harder to predict just because there's been some pretty big fluctuations. But so in the end, we're anticipating ending the year with the ending fund balance about $500,000 more than what we started. When we look at our general fund reserves over the last 5 years, again, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but we're kind of in this stable zone right now where we still are planning to end the year with reserves that are above the level required by the board. So that red line represents the minimum level of reserves we are required to have for board policy. And you can see even when we look at 5 years ago and now, it's about a 1.6% change. So over that 5-year period, it's pretty stable. There's been a little bit of movement along the way. But overall, nothing really big and different is happening when it comes to our general fund reserves. Take another pause. I'm just going to keep cruising. So let's talk about our budget outlook. Got my crystal ball out, bring it back every year. One good thing I could say about our budget process for next year. So we are in the middle of a biennium. So the state operates on the biennial budget. So we are going into year 2 of that biennium. So a lot of things that are generally unknown at the time that we build our budget are known. We already know what our state school fund allocation is going to be. And so that's very, very helpful. When it comes to students, though, we make a projection on what our enrollment is anticipated to be. We're anticipating a slight decline next year, not too significantly. I kind of feel like our enrollment might be over projected at this point in time based on things that have happened over the last couple of months, but we'll kind of wait and see what that looks like. So we've made our assumption about our enrollment for next year. We already know what the state school fund allocation is going to be. And then the only other big assumptions we make when it comes to our general fund resources have to do with property taxes. So I wanted to take a minute, kind of like a little timeout, just to talk specifically about the local option levy. So the biggest factor by far in terms of budget assumptions for next year's budget, we are assuming that the local option renewal that's going before voters next month is going to pass. If that local option renewal doesn't pass, we will have to reduce our budget, our general fund budget, by about 10%, which is almost $9 million, and the equivalent of almost 100 positions, 100 FTE. So I wanted to just take a minute to hand this out so everyone has a copy of our local option levy quick facts. So just answers like the basic questions around what is the local option levy, why do we need it, what is it on? So this is really a continuation of something the district has had in place since 2006, I believe. It's been renewed every 5 years for the last few cycles now. And so this is a really big factor because if the levy doesn't pass, then we will definitely have to be making some pretty significant shifts in our plans for next year. So the budget that we're putting forward to the board and budget committee assumes a passage of the levy. And there's a bunch of information in that handout that you have now with you. School's out. That's a thing with the whole hand against the wall. So I just wanted to highlight that real quick. Are there any questions about the local option levy that I can answer? Yes.
I've spoken to quite a few community members even at the tour last week, and predominantly people didn't realize there was a levy out there. Have we, there seemed, if, for what is being said, how important it is, are we communicating it very well to get it out there?
Well, I know we just issued a news item last week. And so now that is up on our website, and we have a section of our website just dedicated to the local option levy. Like the handout that I just provided, that's the kind of information that we have available. Districts, in terms of like district staff on district time, obviously aren't allowed to advocate or, you know, advocate for a yes or no vote on that levy. So the best thing we can do is provide information. So I think starting, I know our plan was to really kick that up in gear in mid-April. The election is on May 17th. So we're about a month out at this point. I anticipate more information coming out. I believe that there is a political action committee that's been formed to advocate for the levy. And Vince, do you know who I could recommend people or refer people to?
You can refer them to me
Okay,
or pay for it.
great. Vince is a board member. The same rules don't apply to him when it comes to advocacy. So if you're interested in that, or if you have questions about that, connect with Vince and he can maybe point you in the right direction of who's doing some of that work around town. But I know that's starting to happen. So the local option levy is definitely a big deal for us, and definitely something we are paying a lot of attention to, especially when it comes to our budget for next year. So in terms, so that kind of covers the, you know, the big components of our general fund resources. When we think about our spending requirements, there's always kind of a big question mark around salaries and benefits. Moving into next year, we have agreements already in place with our certified group and our non-rep group, so we already kind of know what to anticipate around salary changes for those two groups. So, and those groups both have a negotiated 2% COLA for next year. So we're applying that budget assumption across the board for all of our employees when we build our budget for next year. Another benefit of being in the middle of biennium is that our retirement, our pension system contribution rates, they only change every other year. And so because we're in the middle of biennium, we know that that's not changing, because sometimes that can fluctuate quite a bit and have a really big impact on our budget. So that's also, we're going into next year knowing that that's set, it's the same as it is this year. And then when it comes to things like contracted services and supplies and materials, a little different. I mean, normally in prior years, we would kind of just assume, you know, like 2% increase for supplies and materials. And we have, you know, some major contracts like with our transportation provider. We already know what those increases are going to be. It's a little different just with a lot of the changes with supplies and the demand and supply chain issues. We kind of anticipate some more fluctuation in these types of areas. And with contracted services, at this point, I feel like we've stabilized our agreements with our transportation providers, but we have made some substantial changes with those agreements. Kind of the same effect that around the conversations we have at this table, just with driver wages and recruitment and retention. And so that's been an area that we've struggled with our transportation providers. So we've had to work through some of those issues as well. Some big positives that have come out of the last couple of years are some pots of money that have been made available to the district outside of our general fund. One of them is a state pot of money, which is the Student Investment Account, SIA grant. And then the other big pot of money is the ESSER 3 grant. So ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. So that's that big federal stimulus that was provided to schools. So we're kind of in the third phase of that right now. And so ESSER 3 was the third and final federal stimulus. So these funds are available to us on a temporary basis. So they're one-time funds. We're using a lot of these one-time funds to kind of just maintain some continuity with our operations. So we're using a lot of this one-time money to pay for staffing. We know that that's going to create kind of a big funding cliff once those funds run out, but we're really trying to just prioritize our continuous operations. The focus of the ESSER funds are really to address unfinished instruction. So we are required to spend a certain percentage of those funds in areas that focus on addressing unfinished instruction. I made a note, so we're currently funding about 25 FTE, including 20 FTE in classified positions with the ESSER 3 funds. So it's just something we have to pay attention to because we know that eventually those funds will be depleted, and then we'll need to sort of address what our next steps are with some of the positions we've been funding. So my big takeaways, in terms of sort of where we're at financially right now, we're doing okay. We're stable. We're maintaining a pretty significant staffing level, even though our enrollments decreased. We've been intentional about keeping it that way to some degree in terms of addressing a lot of the unfinished instruction and addressing a lot of the new needs that have come up over the last couple of years. My biggest takeaway is just what we're anticipating in the future. Things for next year look pretty good. Beyond that, it doesn't look very good for us. We do not anticipate a big increase in our state school fund allocation in the next biennium. And I think that's on people's minds a lot. And I think with the ending of the federal stimulus funds, and again, this isn't a Corvallis school district issue. This is every school district in the country kind of issue. Just that transition away from all of those one-time dollars back into sort of a regular or normal, or I don't know, everyone says normal like this now because it's changed, but kind of that kind of regular level of operations and funding that we experienced pre-COVID. So that's kind of my big takeaways, but if you have any questions, let me know.
Can you send us a copy of that? Just
Sure.
perfect. Just send it.
I'll fix that one slide.
All right. Thank you.
Can maybe ask a question?
Yeah.
People, I've heard people, not necessarily in district, but just in general, talk about funds being given to employers for retention of employees, this or that. Is this any type of funding our district has received? What's the name of it? And what have we used it for? If we did,
Well, we've used some of our ESSER funds
is that what that?
in the
is that-
past. Last year, we used some of our ESSER funds to pay employees that worked when we were not in person and we had staff members that were working in person. I know we made some payments last year and we were using our ESSER dollars for that. There was some legislation passed at the state level just earlier this year around recruitment and retention, because it's definitely it's a hot topic right now. And there are funds coming our way, but it's pretty, we kind of have an idea of what that looks like, but we haven't gotten a ton of information about that yet. And I think it's ODE that's writing the rules for that. I anticipate we're going to keep hearing more about it, but I don't have a ton of information about it yet.
So I think what I heard is that the ESSER funds were some of the funds people were talking about when they referred to that. And there's some additional funds that may be coming from the state to address retention and even recruitment of employees. And there's not a lot of information yet. Do we have an idea? I'm gonna guess it's one-time money. Do we have an idea when that money will come?
It's going to come sometime next fiscal year. I anticipate that. There's definitely a push to make that money available to districts as soon as possible. But there's definitely quite a process that has to go through at the state level to come to fruition. I've only gotten one update since the legislation passed, and I believe that the last update I got that the bill hadn't been signed by the governor yet, so that was preventing some of the work from starting. That might have changed by now. That was maybe a couple weeks ago. I don't know. It's been we haven't gotten a ton of information. It was part of a really big bill that had a lot of different things in it, but there was a component about recruitment and retention. And so every district in the state, no, I'm sorry, it's not like a allocation, it's a non-competitive grant. I do know that. So it's not like we're just gonna get money. We'll need to submit an application for the funds and to say what we're gonna do with the money, but it's not competitive. So we have access to the money for sure.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not this time.
So Mary, you had mentioned you have several articles you wanted to bring forward today. Do you want to go ahead and start with that?
Sure.
All right, hold, we start with, first one's Article 2, District Rights.
Let's see. So largely in 2.1, we struck the word specifically because limited by the term of the agreement seems pretty straightforward. We don't think we need that. The other big change, the third paragraph down, this process, I don't know if you've ever used it, but it runs contrary to the law too, and it says that in here. But we don't think we need it. We have laws that control this kind of stuff that says 90 expedited bargaining is 90 days. So that's why we struck that. Rather than go through each single thing down here at the 2.2, why you're seeing struck from here is for a couple different reasons. And some of it's in contrary to the law, like, we have the bargain over effects, mandatory subjects, things like that. There's a few of them in here that are enumerated in the law, so I don't think we need them in the contract as well. As Jennifer likes to say, we just follow the law. So that's largely what we have for 2. You want to take 3 on? And if you do read this, have other questions, please do.
Let me just
Come back.
clarify formatting so I know. So anything that's highlighted is a change. And then whatever you're striking, that's obvious. And then if there's additions, it's still highlighted. right?
Yeah, it'll be
Okay.
bold, it'll be underlined, and it'll be highlighted. You will see later on that there's some stuff in blue. I had my secretary go through and try to put everything so there was, the typos were gone, and we changed pronouns from he, she to they, them, that kind of stuff. So that anything in blue is not intended to change the meaning of the contract, just the style in which it's done. If it's a typo or if we want to switch to general literature.
I think in 2A, it said to determine the services to be rendered to the citizens of the district. And that just seemed like an unusual word to use. So,
We're open if you have better words. on that one.
left the word out altogether, it just seemed rendered by the district is good enough for that. So 3, the only thing we did was, I believe, was added this 3.5. The district should not contract out any bargaining unit work during the life of the school. This was reclassification. And in the first sentence, there was kind of important, the performing duties of a higher position that's currently in existence, or if they believe that their salary placement is incorrect. Chapter, which is additions, I believe. And unit shall appoint at least 1 person to any reclassification study done. Anyway, then the other is just a few things. We put the salary placement under the 5.2 because of what it was on the top. Employee status. I think this was what Hobie did. First part about it. Employees who seek to be reclassified must have been in the current position for an equivalent of 150 calendar days before reclassification can be requested. And no employee should be retaliated against for making a reclassification request. It's an addition that we have. Step placement. To change some wordings of the other remedies made by the committee, because it may not be that that's what we're doing. We might be doing something else sometimes, as we take duties away in the restructuring. And just propose to run the following within 30 calendar days of the recommendation instead of work days. And then we added the other remedy again over here, giving a little more leeway to the committee. All duties removed from the position that shall remain within the bargaining unit. So that if we take duties away from an employee, we would hope that they would go to another employee. Where they should have been. And if the committee makes a recommendation to reclassify or adjust. Because not necessarily always reclassify, sometimes we change what they're doing. Step advancement stayed the same. And 5.7, there's only the denial of the reclassification or adjustment by the human resources director may be briefed.
Can I have some clarifying questions?
Absolutely.
One, based on looking at wanting to put salary placement in there, I'm wondering if you want to consider also a addition to the title of it, so it's more than, sounds like just a reclassification you're considering. The other is, are you thinking there's a statutory limitation based on salary placement? So 10 years down the road, someone doesn't come back because contracts change over time. I don't know if there was discussion in regards to that as you were putting that together, but that would be, you're wondering.
So I don't think we had that specific discussion, but I would say that the idea here is that your reclass, you kind of get the most bang for your buck at your reclass committee. They can really handle whether it's reclasses. If somebody says, hey, when I transferred to this job, you never, back then you just moved to step one or the other, you didn't take into consideration of like my experience, right? Something like that, where they could come before the committee would have that discussion and make the decision whether that was appropriate or not. That's the idea. I think changing the title is a good point, because it does do more than reclass. But that's more of the discussions we have, is that people, you hear people say from time to time, you didn't take this into consideration. What are they gonna do now? Well, now they can come here and have the discussion with the committee, and the committee would make the decision whether or not it's valid or not. That was the discussion, is more fully circled around. And to be clear on 5.7, the idea of this is that if the committee makes a decision to deny something or to approve something, that nobody can read that. This literally is the end of the road. Nobody's made an agreement. And the human resource person says, no, then that's the only thing we would be able to agree. Any
Right,
decision
but
the
that comes
committee
from the
makes.
committee, so I just find that an interesting statement.
So, well, it's meant to be to protect the committee, so that anything that's made by mutual agreement of both sides of the committee is not agreeable. Only if we disagree all the way through the process would it be that.
Well, that's not how it's worded, but okay.
Well, we're open to counters.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to understand sort
Sure.
of some thought behind some of this.
Sure. Okay, so the change you'll see under Article 7.1, obviously, the layoff notice currently is 2 weeks. We think 30 days is pretty reasonable, because that's basically what it takes to get, you're gonna get laid off. You guys know more than 2 weeks in advance, unless it's some crazy emergency, I'd say you know well in advance. But it allows people to do the things they need to get on like the medical plan for the state, or it usually takes about a month, that kind of thing. And give them time to prepare, right, for the inevitable layoff. So that's the reason why we're asking to increase that from 2 weeks to essentially 4 weeks. And we got rid of personal delivery because, we don't know what that would entail or look like. It's much clearer if you just, send them the notice, certified mail. And I think the next change isn't until 7.92 recall. What we did here, we thought it was a little odd that folks would contact you every 3 months to say, hey, I still want my job back if you get it. So we kind of changed this to be that they would give you the current information so you can contact them, because they don't know when their job's gonna, when you're gonna have the funding to reinstate their job. So they would make sure they have the correct information with you. You would just contact them, and they would make their decisions from there. Under 7.93, we bumped this from 7 to 10 work days. The main reason is a few different times, I've seen anyway. Somebody says you're gonna be laid off for a number of months and they go do something else. Like one person had a family emergency, went to take care of their family right over there. Granted, this is before email was super huge, because I'm old, but they got back to find out that they lost their job and they didn't know anything about it, right? This gives them a little extra time if they're going out of town for a couple weeks for some reason to get back and to be able to respond to you. That's the idea behind that change, to add those 3 days of the work days. And no, there is one more change. On the next page under D, this just mirrors what we did earlier with the 3-month piece under 7.92. Oh, and there's 15 work days above that under the recall. And that's usually because people that are laid off for a period of time make other arrangements at any time to give notice or do whatever they're doing. So get the childcare covered or whatnot. So it gives them a little more time to be able to get all that done so they can come back to work full force. I'm gonna try to figure that out while they're trying to work with it.
Article 8 is personnel records. An employee, we added an employee may attach a written response to any information placed in their personnel file. I think you do that, but it just needed, that wasn't written in there. Removal of materials. He's asking if they've been employed for 2 consecutive years without further reprimand, the letter and any documents related to the letter shall upon request be purged. And then the Xed out an exception to this practice will be made when the reprimands contains a written warning of discharge. We don't believe that that should stop it from being purged. And access, employees will have access to review the personnel file during regular district office hours. Employees shall be entitled to 1 copy of their file once every school year.
Was there any discussion whether that's paper or electronic?
I think the discussion I recall was mostly digital. Was the
Mostly
idea,
digital.
whatever's the easiest format.
Okay. So this is Article 9, vacancies, job postings, and promotions. Nothing in 9.1, 9.2. The district will post all bargaining the job openings on the district website and email out to all classified employees. A lot of people aren't getting them, and they're like, if that's possible. I took a few words out there. Employee will be considered to be interviewed if they meet the qualifications. And the district will interview all qualified internal candidates for a position. Once a candidate is not selected to grant an interview, the MFS should be notified. I know this, in theory, you'd like this to be happening, but it's not. Pay for promotion was just a few word changes, and then the only other strike was the district shall include a classified employee on interview committees for all positions.
And I asked a clarifying question. In regards to being emailed out to employees, I know now that employees don't always pay attention to all emails, so that's just additional work that's being added. What was the rationale behind that?
Well, we own it too, right? If we're not reading the emails you send us, then, what else can you do? Send out, signals in the air? I mean, I think if they're getting an email directly to them, and they're not reading it, they miss it. That was the thinking, as I seem to recall it, is that most of these are in other districts are just automated, so they just go out to a group, right, like that. It's cut down a lot of concerns about, I didn't know this, or I should have been told that, all these kinds of things you hear. Pretty hard to argue that you didn't get notification when it's sitting in your inbox, you haven't read it, right? So.
I guess I would be concerned because I know how much email we all get, and every single one that goes out, that's a lot of extra email, which means the important stuff is not being paid attention to. So I guess I want to understand if there's a different way to go about doing it than actually clogging email and having to create, set up all those rules seem to actually, again, create more work and probably more frustration depending on how much email you get.
Well, we're here proposing the idea to give a better.
I'm
Counter
trying
for
to
us,
get
yeah.
information to understand the need behind it.
Yeah, the idea really, as I recall, jump in right from better wrong here, is that we just want to make sure people are getting some, regulated, this is the way it always happens, kind of, we're gonna make sure you have it, way of seeing this stuff, because it may be posted in an area of the building where somebody never goes by, right? Or we'll put it in the break room, whenever there's people that never ever go in the break room, right? So it's just kind of one of those things where we're trying to figure out a way to get the notification out, so everybody has the same, ability to view it. And I don't know if you could put a different heading on it, it says new job or vacant job, or maybe that would, and people aren't interested, would skip those because they know they don't have to read them if they want to know that, right? I don't know the answer to your question. I'm just trying to throw out some ideas, and we're open to any kind of suggestions you guys have. We're just trying to figure that piece out.
Well, particularly looking at, I think there's a lot of employees that we have that are looking to go into different positions, and I think they're all pretty busy, but it's still, you're right, the onus is on them to check their email, and hopefully we can find some way to either, like Kobe said in the top, somehow make it so they understand that this is important. That's what they're looking for.
All right, so Article 12 here, the first change you'll see is under 12.1.3, and this seems, I find it very interesting because see if we're day before or after and that kind of stuff, but it says authorized leave. Well, all time that you take off has to be authorized by your supervisor, right? Or in theory, anyway. I mean, that's, I don't
Well, we
know.
can tighten up those pieces too, so.
So, yeah, well, okay, but that's the reason for the strike through is because it seems kind of arbitrary, just to have a rule that already your management person should be approving or not approving you to take this time. That's the point of striking that. Down below is the inclusion of the holidays. The stuff in blue is stuff we already have. Like MLK was changed to Martin Luther King Jr., the full spelling of the name. I guess that's putting my secretary, that's the proper way. The stuff in yellow is added holidays that are out there. Like the one that caught me by surprise is Indigenous Peoples Day. It used to be Columbus Day. I didn't realize that was passed as a holiday, so it's included here. The others are holidays that, you know, we'd like to see, and we'd like to see some equity between your 9 to 11 month employees with your full-time employees here. That's why you see more suggested down below here. Because these are times when they're there working, right? We're not asking for the 4th of July for those folks because they're not here, right? It's Juneteenth and some years they won't get because they're not here. These are the ones where they're working around these holidays. They're just like the other employees, they're here. So that was the intent behind those. And then on the next page, just kind of speaks to what I was exactly talking about 12.4, less than 12 month employees that, you know, work through they have their calendar goes through the Juneteenth or goes through Independence Day, will receive those as holidays, right? Paid holidays. And then the other one is just a safeguard. So if there's any other holidays given any other groups, it's Me Too language I'm sure you're familiar with or have seen in some fashion in other contracts.
So clarification in regards to the added holidays.
Yes.
Assuming then less work days or more work days being added that are non-student days? Because right now, so for example, our educational system, which is a big group, right? They have so many holidays and we build that within the work calendars and our student contact days. So now we're adding these days, which is either we're increasing the days, right? So financial impact, I want to clarify
Sure.
if that was the intent.
Well, the intent was to give them more equity with people above. I mean, they're here working just like them before and after Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that stuff. Yes, we recognize that there's a financial impact to that. I guess it depends how you do the calendar. Really, that's kind of your domain, but I could see where there could be an impact with that. And bargaining is a serious trade-offs, right? So money from one area sometimes gets moved from another area, right?
Article 17 is the JLNC, the Joint Labor Management Committee. Under topics, we just added JLNC may address all issues except active grievances, bargaining, and individual personality. We took remove, of course, the changes that were put in, including that and took everything away. And we took off the on 17.7 at the end for up to 2 hours per month for a meeting of 10 minutes, and that's because it doesn't, the 2016 doesn't matter now anyway, it's been covered. So it really was just a minor change there to follow. And then the rest of it was just capital usage, things like that. Probably.
Yeah. So in Article 20, first change of season to 2.2, we changed flagrant to gross, and a lot, gross has been arbitrated a lot more. We really know what that means, more than flagrant. That's the reason for that change, is to make that clear. And then the other small change we have is under 20.3.1. So this one here was a change. We just felt like 3 months was a long time. Maybe that's not the right number, but we were thinking that might be something we want to look at, maybe figure out what would be the right number for that. And then on the back page, we just have a correction. We have something. I think something capitalized and should not be capitalized. And then Article 21, again, I'm going to quote Jennifer again here. We just want to follow the law. So we're striking everything out, but where it says we'll follow the law.
Well, I expected to see other things then that would be out of here based on that movie.
Well, but that doesn't work in my interest, so I'm not going to quote that.
Oh, okay, all right, I'll use that.
There you go. Yeah, this would just remove this language and just say that we're going to follow the laws of PECA, which are pretty clear. And the lockout language is the only other thing left in there. All right, under Article 22. So 22.2.5, reason for this change, there's two changes in here. The first one is that the union actually has liability here legally if we aren't handling this process. And under the law, as the official, as the representative, the grievance becomes our domain to handle. And not being there, which this would suggest, the word may in there, you know, could create many legal issues for us down the road, DFR charges and whatnot. So that's the main reason for the change there. And then this piece here is just, I just think it's just outdated language after the grievance is signed. I mean, I don't think that we do that anymore. I think it's sent by email or digital or, you know, and you have a return email on that, right? So you know who you got it from. So that's the intent there, just to clean up old language is how I see that. So if you guys see it different, that's fine, but that's how I see it.
I understand what you mean by 22.2.5, but what if the person doesn't want you to represent them?
Grievances under the law are our domain. I mean, that's just how they work. They can file a complaint, right? And then go that way. But if it's a grievance, we're the final adjudicator of that grievance under the law. So we have to be present because they could agree to something with you for this person, and these other 5 people don't get that. And we're the ones that let it happen. It's how they look at it legally, right? So that is the only intent there. It's just that we're in the room. You know, we're making sure that the process is being, followed properly. And then on the next page, this is more 22.3.3. This again, I think is just old language that nobody's ever bothered to take out. I haven't seen in any chapter the grievance form yet. Everybody sends me via email. And I think 22.3.5 is covered under House Bill 2016, which we've already bargained. 22.3.6. Yeah, this is also covered under House Bill 2016. 22.83 is in violation of House Bill 22 or 2016. Because it says during their normal working hours in the bill. So I think that's the major reason for those changes, just cleaning it up. Now I did change something here, and I intend to get good discussion with some folks here on our team. So we have 10 days to file a grievance. Okay, I mean, it used to be, I'll just tell you, we wanted to have 10 days, 5 days, 3 days, because we wanted to get through the process as fast as possible. I get that, but I think on the front end of this, it makes more sense to get it right and to really look into it before you go talk to your supervisor and have a good discussion, because you might find out through that process that this is not a grievance, right? This is somebody's upset or whatever it might be. And so giving us a little more front end time to be able to do that rather than have to hurry through these steps, I think makes for a better resolution at the end, right? We can keep the stuff away from you that's not relevant. And then the stuff that is, we've got exact details. We can say, this is what's going on, here you go. So that's why you're seeing that change there. I've worked with this in other areas, and it's worked actually reduce grievances. You don't have a ton here, but there's work to reduce grievances because we really know what we're talking about when we meet, rather than having to try to hurry to meet these 10 and 5 day timelines. So that's the reason for that change there, which is reflected below under 24.41. And again, just clean up language under 22.42. hand sign it. I mean, you know, if they're emailing it to you, they're gonna have a return address on there. Just feels like it's stuff that's old language, nobody's ever taken out. On the next page, so I took out who has administrative authority to act, because that seems rather obvious. If we're going through a grievance procedure, we're dealing with the principal, immediate supervisor, or HR, right? I think if you guys are really concerned about that, we don't have a lot of heartburn putting it back in, but it just seems to create a question where I don't think there is one. If somebody says, well, do I talk to you? I don't know if you have, if you have the ability to do this, right? So that's why that was removed. I don't know why we removed the contract article, so we can put that back in. I think that was just an error.
I'm going to make a guess, and so it might just be worth talking on your end. The reason it was or immediate superior, because I do think often I hear it is our classified staff sometimes will think the teachers is their superior and their person, and they don't have that authority. Because
Maybe.
when I talk to people about schedules, they think like the teacher gives them the schedule, but they're not the supervisor, right? They might be guiding or leading the work. So that might have been a piece of it. So we may want to just talk more about that for that reason.
Yeah, we can certainly make that clear and put down who we're talking about, so nobody has to guess either, right? So, and then the last sentence here, this didn't particularly make sense to me. Again, it feels like it's old language. This has never been addressed. It says, and the reasons why the aggrieved considered the decision rendered as unacceptable. So if you say no, whoever the supervisor is, what am I saying to that? You know, okay, I find it unacceptable because you said no. I just don't see how it helps the process, right? If we're going through and doing a meaningful process and having good discussion, and people of good belief can disagree, right? And we understand what's going on there because you're making the decision, you're putting it in writing. I'm not sure what this means, what we want to accomplish with this piece. Because when it goes to the next level, theoretically, we'll have new eyes looking at it, right? We'll have the write-up from the last decision, and we'll have the discussion again. So I'm just not sure what this accomplishes. That's why it is struck out. I just don't see it as being helpful to the process. But if you have better ideas or there's things you want to add to that that makes more sense, we're open to that. But that's the reason why we struck it. And this is another one here. We've changed from 5 to 10. Decision to need supervisor. And the reason why is, again, is just trying to hurry through these steps rather than maybe having some better discussions. You'll see it repeated under 22.43, same exact thing, same exact reason. We're trying to give people time to kind of think about it and decide, maybe I'm done with this grievance, or maybe there's more to it, whatnot. And you'll see that followed through the last paragraph there too. And then 22.4.4, this didn't make any sense to me either, because it said specific grievance filed at level 1. So that negates all those discussions we're having afterwards, where the district might be bringing new information that we don't have to the table. Or we may find out something and say, oh, this is not what we thought it was. Okay, we'll withdraw that grievance. Or, oh, hey, district, you're not aware, and we just got some information. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Maybe we'll settle this grievance, right? It didn't make any sense to just limit it to, okay, I wrote down something and that's all we're going to have a discussion. That doesn't make any sense to me, because how do you get the full story, right? Especially if you're going to arbitrate something and spend that money, you want them to have the full story so everybody knows what's going on. So that's why that struck. Again, it might just be old language, I don't know. And I really didn't like your arbitration process, because it's all it really talked about was all the things we can't do versus, hey, look, we give it to the arbitrator, they make the decision. They stay limited to what we're talking about. They don't go digging around the contract. They stay limited to our issue, and they render a decision we both have to live with. So that was that first paragraph there was a much cleaner version of kind of what everything else said, in my opinion. Again, that's something we can talk more about, but it just didn't seem, it just seemed like there was a lot of stuff in here about different things that just didn't really matter. If we give an arbitrator this is your issue, this is going to be limited to this issue, here's the case, give us a decision, we both live by it, that seems much cleaner. So that was the reason for that change. I feel like, I read that and felt like we might be arbitrating what the arbitrator does, you know, so.
Can I just ask, in your, it's the second sentence, the arbitrator shall not add to, subtract from, alter, or modify the terms of disagreement. Do you mean the grievance? Because when
Yeah,
I think agreement, I think this is our agreement, right? So I
Yeah.
just want to clarify what you mean there.
so my understanding of that is that they won't, we bring them a case. This is my case, this is your case. These are the facts. They don't reach over here and start grabbing other things from other articles and start bringing that into the argument, because it's not what we went through the process with, right? So it's to limit them to what we give them at the time to make the decision. Because some arbitrators in the past I've seen, it's been a lot of years, because usually we have language like this now, especially in the private sector. You're arbitrating Article 14, also they're pulling in 27 and 13 that have nothing to, you know, like in your mind, that's not your argument, and they're bringing that in to make their case, right? That's not what we were talking about the lower levels. It doesn't make any sense to do that, right?
Would it sound better if this was just the word the agreement that was made instead of?
Well, again, I think
Disagreement.
agreement we use very broadly in a lot of different ways. I think you, and that's why I was just clarifying, I think you mean bringing, not having them, meaning the arbitrator, actually make any changes or bring other things in.
Right.
From the
Yeah.
grievance or case or whatever you want to refer
Right.
to coming forward. But again, when I think of agreement, that sort of opens it up. So I just want to be really clear what you mean.
Well, we could add the word contractual in front of it too. I mean, really, we just don't want them delving into other parts of the contract to justify some decision they make when that's not what we gave them. We gave them column A and column B, and they got to choose, right? We didn't give them, you know, all these other things for a reason. It's not what we're talking about. I think that's it. We tried to get you more, Jennifer, but that's all I can get you done today, so.
Well, if I go based on your statement of it's in the law, then I'm thinking like Article 4,
Well, we
we
already
can
did that.
rewrite because it's in the law.
Right. No, and to be fair, some of it's actually in violation of the law too. I mean, you can't, I mean, we have, like the management rights section, there's some things there where we get new jobs or you know, you reduce people, you know, you're gonna meet with us, right? It's mandatory subject, right? So why is it in there? You know, it's violation of the law. It's not even that it's the law. PECPA is the one where I really pulled that out for you. Just want to follow the law. Completely.
Well, in all honesty, the way, I heard you say you're taking some of it out because it's already in law.
Some of it, yeah.
But you also have referenced, well, sometimes it's nice for people to see it in
Yep.
here. And so when I see you take out to transfer bargaining unit work, you know, to others or to assign and designate work duties, that is the right of management. And if you take it out, it almost looks like you're taking that right away. I
Well-
don't think that was your intent, and maybe sort of it was.
Well, no, some of it, I think, yeah, I would say part of that statement, I would agree with, the other part I would not. I think if we're talking about, you know, transfers, I mean, we have a discipline process that could be a demotion, right? We have parts of that that conflict, right? With things that we have in other parts of the contract too, where we sit down, we have those discussions, we've done it, you know, since I've been here, we have discussions when some of these things happen, because it's just good policy, but that conflicts with that, right? Like I said, I think honestly, some of this language runs going back in the contract, I think it's been in there since the 50s, you know, so, you know, and some of it just House Bill 2016 just knocked out a lot of it. So, you know, there's different things in there. I mean, this is a first draft. We want your input. We want to hear what you have to say and what you think. We're not trying to hide anything. We're just telling you our intent right up front. So you shouldn't have to guess. If you're guessing, ask questions and we'll have to tell you.
Okay. So one, I appreciate you providing this because it gives us, I think, a start to look at this. I know we've been starting to do ours, and what I think we can do is in preparation for the next meeting is be able to respond to that and provide ours. We don't have nearly as much, I can let you know that. And so then we'll go from there. Mary, you had mentioned, and I don't know if there's more articles you'll be working on, and this was just a.
Yeah, this was just the ones that there's still a few like we hoped, but not the next time, but the time after, to go to wages and whatever, because we're still working on, as you had talked about, the shortened salary schedule.
Okay.
And then for the next one, we'll have some other things that we've been working on, like the safety language and other things that are in there. Some of that long House Bill 2016 that we did. And
Were we working on that again?
no, there was just a few things that we needed. Oh gosh, no.
We want to show you it, so you can
Yeah.
agree that we've transferred them
Because
properly.
that was,
That's-
for you to see, and then there was maybe one or two sentences, but that was. That was all. That was just a little more clarification for employees. But no, we don't want to go. Not in this lifetime, please.
So we gave you all the super exciting stuff right now.
Yeah.
Mostly it's technical language, really, you know. That's why it's easy to give to you, because we don't have as much discussion with that stuff, so.
And have you looked at MOAs? Is that another piece you'll be bringing forward as far as which pieces you have interest in incorporating in?
Yeah,
Okay,
that was put in our, that's what she read, when she said the MOAs too, because there's some of those I think can go away, and there's some that we want to incorporate. And we kind of want to have some discussion with you, so we know where you stand with some of that. So some of that might be real easy.
Okay.
Some of it might be, we have to have more discussion about. So,
okay. Okay, so our next meeting is,
16,
I think it's 26.
1 to 5.
You changed all the future ones 1 to 5, right?
yes,
Okay.
this
make
was
sure
the
you got that
first
right.
one we adjusted. So yes, 426, 1 to 5 in here.
Okay.
What we will do is come back in response and also provide ours. And then we can, you know, again, sort of the same thing, clarifying questions, be able to have that conversation. I don't know if you'll have more to bring at that point, and then we can do that, so then teams can kind of step away and talk through it.
Mhm.
I'm assuming, but I don't want to assume incorrectly, that we're doing package deal. We're not doing TA individually. My preference is we're doing it as a whole. I think in the past, we've kind of done that with you, but I want to clarify.
Well, I would say since there is so much, you know, that's technical and stuff, I think it would behoove us to knock out the things that we can get out right away, and then stuff that we're struggling with to put into a package, or else we'll have a 25 article package, right, you know, which would be a novel. So I think it'd be a little easier, and I think our preference would be to try to see the things we can agree on and get those off the table out of the way, and then set aside the stuff that we know we need more work on, and then start talking about bundles at that point. That would be our preference.
Okay, so we'll talk about that, just because I think there's more than just technical in here. I think there's some actual.
No, there is.
Okay,
No, I said a lot of technical. I didn't say all.
okay, okay,
All of these are not technical, right? So,
okay. So based on that, I think we caucus, and I don't foresee us coming back.
yeah,
Allows your team to work, and then we'll go through and be able to talk through.
sure.
So you guys can stay in here, we'll go in Ryan's office.
All right.
Okay.
You going off the record there, Bud?